When we think about trauma at work, our minds usually go to, high-stakes fields.
Right, the first responders, the military.
Exactly, the people rushing toward a crisis. But today we're looking at something different. What about the invisible toll taken in the quiet rooms?
The labs, the workstations.
Yeah, the secure offices where the most horrific things are processed, handled, and refined, frame by painstaking frame. So for today's deep dive, that's exactly where we're going, into that hidden emotional landscape. Our sources center on this really powerful academic manuscript. It's called First Person, Frame by Frame.
It was written specifically for a forensic audience.
It's rigorous, it's deeply personal, and it really fundamentally challenges the professional norms around this idea of vicarious trauma. Our mission for you is pretty clear. We need to unpack the nature of what this work calls mediated trauma.
Trauma that's absorbed through technology, not in the moment.
And we need to understand why, despite the sheer gravity of the material, this specific type of exposure remains, structurally invisible within the very institutions that depend on it.
And the context of this piece is it's crucial to the whole argument. It was written in April 2025.
Okay.
It was a direct response to a call for papers on vicarious trauma in forensic science, and it focuses on that rigorous, often completely unremarked labor of specialists.
The analysts, the examiners, the people turning raw data into court-ready evidence.
Exactly. But here's the detail that just sets the whole thing up.
Go on.
The manuscript was declined, without comment, by the forensic journal it was submitted to.
Wow.
And the author's take was that the silence itself, that refusal to engage, it perfectly completes the argument they were making about invisibility.
So the rejection is actually proof.
It's the final piece of the puzzle. It shows the institutional resistance in action.
That is a stunning piece of meta-commentary. The system proves the argument just by rejecting it. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. If the goal was to talk about vicarious trauma, what was so different about this specific kind of forensic exposure? What did the journal miss?
Well, I think it's because this exposure, it doesn't fit our usual picture of workplace stress. It's not a single, explosive event. It's quiet.
Right.
It's a cumulative weight absorbed over days, months, years of just repetitive technological work.
The paper has a great phrase for it. It calls this a situated account of what it means to bear witness through technology. So you're alone. You're tasked with making the worst possible moments perfectly clear. And to do that, you have to watch them, slow them down, stabilize them, often on a constant loop.
And that distinction is everything. Your traditional models for vicarious trauma, they often come from direct interactions, with victims or at a crime scene. This is different.
This is mediated trauma.
Yes. It's absorbed in a confined, brightly lit, silent office. It's the act of handling, refining, clarifying, and making the evidence usable for other people, attorneys, judges.
And because it doesn't have that adrenaline rush or the physical risk of field work?
It's so easily dismissed, and that's how it becomes, as the paper says, structurally invisible.
I can just hear the pushback now. It's just technical work. Why can't they compartmentalize? They're not therapists. They're just processing data. How does the manuscript get around that?
It gives this searing description of the work, and it shows that you can't separate the technical from the emotional. To clarify a dark, grainy image of an incident, for instance, you have to process that visual data over and over.
Dozens, maybe hundreds of times.
Right. Until you can see past the graininess, understand the space, the timing, the sequence. The technical goal, making it legible, forces the specialist to inhabit the material, emotionally and cognitively.
And this is where the language in the source just really hits you. The author calls it the long, unremarked labor of watching, replaying, clarifying, and carrying images.
Carrying images. That phrase is so important.
It's that constant loop, isn't it? Just to perfect the evidence.
Exactly. And for me, the most profound insight was the realization that these images, once they're absorbed, they do not end when the case file closes. The image isn't just data on a hard drive anymore. It's carried in the body and the mind of the person who did the work. The system sees the technical job is done, but the emotional witnessing, that frame-by-frame absorption, it just stays.
So we're really talking about somatic experiences here, aren't we? The body keeping the score. You can't just drop the image or the sequence because the project is finished.
That's right. The body holds onto the shock, the pattern of the evidence, even if you consciously try to file it away.
And that term, carrying images, it speaks directly to the failure of compartmentalization when a job demands such perfect focus on something so disturbing.
The work requires a kind of witnessing, a rigor that the system then just completely fails to acknowledge once the technical part is over, which I think brings us right to the author's critique of the institutions themselves.
Okay, let's go there. Because this isn't just a plea for, more funding. The author is questioning the entire architecture of institutional support.
That's right.
So what kind of support are they saying is ineffective?
They're specifically going after mechanisms that demand a certain kind of response, a linear, quantifiable one.
Like talk-based therapy right after an event.
Exactly. Talk-based disclosure, or those routine, box-checking procedural check-ins, the kind that rely on someone being able to immediately put words to their experience.
So the idea is that those conventional methods, they're built for standard, predictable trauma response.
Yeah, a measurable one.
And the critique is that these methods just fail the people whose minds and bodies do not translate cleanly into those neat, conventional forms.
And this is where the invisibility becomes structural. It's not an accident. The institutions are only set up to see trauma if it looks a certain way.
A way that can be easily recorded and put on a risk assessment chart.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So if your trauma shows up differently, if it's delayed or nonverbal or physical, or it comes back as a nonlinear memory, the system has no language for it, no way to validate it, and so no way to treat it.
And let's connect that back to the rejection of the manuscript. If the paper is talking about trauma without, as you said, flattening it into metrics, it's demanding a really nuanced, complex human acknowledgement. And if the institution only cares about data points, then a story about a specialist carrying images is never going to fit their publishing model.
It creates this impossible feedback loop. The specialist has a trauma the system can't measure. And because it can't be measured, the system effectively says it doesn't exist.
So the rejection becomes this big symbolic act.
It reinforces the very invisibility the author was trying to expose. The system's designed to reward neat, tidy, immediate disclosure. And that's the one thing that this kind of mediated cumulative trauma often prevents.
That makes so much sense. The system is basically optimized to ignore the messy reality of how trauma is actually processed, which leads us perfectly into the paper's most, I think, revolutionary idea, its perspective on memory itself.
This is absolutely the aha moment of the whole piece.
Right.
It introduces this concept of the neurodivergent lens. It actually names neurodivergence, which covers a whole range of cognitive differences in how we process sensory input, time, repetition.
It names it not as a problem, not as a pathology to be controlled for.
But as a profound factor in shaping how this traumatic material is held.
And why is that focus on repetition and time so important in this specific forensic context?
Because forensic analysis is repetition. It's the whole job. The need to get maximum technical clarity demands repeated exposure.
Over and over.
And for many neurodivergent minds, that repetition is actually a tool for intense focus and pattern recognition. But when the pattern you're recognizing is a deeply disturbing image, that same repetition embeds the material the visual frames in a uniquely intense and detailed way.
So the professional requirement of frame-by-frame viewing becomes this deeply integrated, non-linear memory.
Which brings us to how it reframes delayed trauma. Traditionally, if trauma shows up months or years later, we see it as a disorder, a failure to cope.
But the source material says something else. It doesn't call it disorder.
It calls it coherence.
Coherence. What's so fascinating is how the author defines that. It suggests the mind isn't broken or fragmented at all. It's being strategic. It's being protective.
Let's define that for you, the listener. Coherence is defined as a whole memory return.
Okay.
The idea is that the frames are held intact until language, time, and safety finally arrive. It's almost like your mind is buffering this massive, horrible video file.
That's a perfect analogy.
It's just waiting for a secure moment to offload it.
And that completely reframes how we see the lingering effects. The delay isn't a malfunction. It's a function. It's internal self-protection.
Exactly. The frames of the sequence are preserved, totally coherent, just waiting for the person to have the internal capacity or the safety in their environment, or even just the right words to finally articulate it. The mind holds the whole pattern intact.
That shifts the whole dynamic. It moves away from the individual being seen as deficient and puts the responsibility back on the institution to provide that safety and those resources.
It completely validates the experience of anyone whose trauma doesn't fit into that, 72-hour HR disclosure window.
Right.
And if we accept that some minds just process this stuff differently, then we have to change our focus. We have to stop demanding immediate verbal reports and start providing flexible, alternative forms of support.
Things that can accommodate delayed visual processing.
Yes. If the memory is held as a coherent visual sequence, then maybe talk therapy alone isn't enough. Maybe support needs to involve visual or spatial or long-term coping strategies.
So the core takeaway for you listening at home is this. If these specialists are performing this intensive technological form of bearing witness, and their job requires them to embed traumatic material through repetition,
Their support has to be tailored, not just to what they see, but to how their individual brains are wired to hold on to that information frame by frame.
it connects the technical skill of the job directly to the human cost.
The better you are at your technical task,
Huh.
at observing, clarifying, repeating the frames, the more deeply that traumatic content gets integrated.
Yeah.
And support has to acknowledge that. It has to move beyond simple metrics.
Okay, let's bring this all together. We started by looking at this profound, heavy labor that's done in solitude, mediated by technology, and is structurally invisible. We've seen how the current support systems often fail because they're built for a measurable, immediate trauma response that just doesn't fit this reality. But the first person, frame-by-frame manuscript gives us a new way to think about it. Memory coherence. It demands we change how we see the memory of trauma itself, that we acknowledge the delay in processing is often a sign of protection, of organization, not disorder.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty critical question for you to think about. If this mediated labor is a unique and necessary way of bearing witness, and if our traditional institutions can barely even acknowledge it exists,
Right.
to the point of silencing the scholarship that names it,
Right.
then what comes next?
What new language, what rituals, what non-metric forms of acknowledgement do we need to create inside these professional cultures to actually help the people who carry these intact frames of memory? It's a huge challenge for any profession that's tasked with making digital evidence legible for the rest of the world.